I'm Cynthia James, and this network is about changing lives one woman at a time. Hello and welcome to Women Awakening. I'm your host, Cynthia James. I get the honor of introducing you to extraordinary women, women that inspire me, women that have taken charge of their own lives, have stepped up, bring their voices to the planet, and are way showers. They are telling us and showing us possibilities for each one of us to stand in our truth and in our power. And so I want you to know we do these every week. I bring a new woman to you. We are on Spotify and iHeart, iTunes, Spreaker, Amazon, and video on YouTube. So wherever you get your podcast, sign up and come back and meet an extraordinary woman. So in March, I was invited to speak at a conference in Florida called Gen W. And I was sitting in the audience, and this woman gets on stage, and she just blew my socks off. That's who I want you to meet today. Roya Hakakian. She's a writer. She's a journalist. Her first book was a volume of selected poems in Persian called For the Sake of Water. It is listed among the leading works of contemporary Persian poetry in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Modern Islamic World. Her poetry has also appeared in numerous anthologies. She's also the author of 3 works of prose in English. Her memoir of coming of age in post-revolutionary Iran, Journey from the Land of No, A Girlhood Caught in Revolutionary Iran, which I read and loved, was a Barnes & Noble's Pick of the Week, Ms. Magazine Must Read of the Summer, Publishers Weekly Best Book of the Year, Elle Magazine's Best Nonfiction Book of 2004. She's also collaborated with leading journalism units on network television, including CBS 60 Minutes, right? She's a speaker, and she's spoken all over, from U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee to high schools on Native American reservations. She's the founding member of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center and is a fellow at Yale University's Davenport College. She was born and raised in a Jewish family of educators in Tehran. She arrived in 1985 to the U.S. as a refugee. Roya, thank you so much for being here.
I got goosebumps. Hi, Cynthia. I have to say that I felt exactly the same about you, and just think of that conference ever since I left it. It was one of the highlights of the past year for me.
Yeah, me too. Well, I want to start, because the people who haven't read your book won't know a lot about you, but I just want to talk about how you grew up.
Well, it's really interesting because I think my life is somewhat divided. It was divided in 2 halves. The first half was from when I was born until I was 12, and then the second half from when I was 12 until I was 18. There's a line going through, and that line is the Iranian Revolution of 1979, because it just turned life upside down, and nothing was ever like it had been, neither in my own family nor in the country. So the first half was sort of the more pleasant half, which was, Iran was a very, was a wonderful country. My relatives, my family, my ancestors had been there for as long as my father, mother, and our grandparents could remember. And we lived in a very eclectic community among Christians, Muslims, and we got along. It was fine. It was great. And then suddenly, in 1978, there were rumblings of a big revolution. which ultimately swept through the entire country. And in February of 1979, the revolution overthrew the monarchy in Iran, which had more than 2,000 years of history. And then suddenly, Iran was a theocratic republic, which meant that we didn't just live as citizens; we lived as citizens subject to the decisions of the clergy in the country. And I got to tell you, regardless of the religion, nobody should ever dream of or wish to live under religious rule.
Yeah. Well, when I was reading your book, first of all, I loved the colorful nature of your family and the creative nature of your family. And at that first part that you talked about, that women were educated, there was all kinds of stuff that was going on that was about flourishing.
Yes.
So then here comes 1979 and everything changes. So for you, because you are a creative, and we'll talk more about that, but for you, how did you manage internally to deal with the feelings of what was occurring?
Well, you've read the book, so that all of this was happening to me when several other things were going on, including puberty, which is bad enough, even without a revolution. But, add a revolution on top of puberty. And then immediately thereafter, 1 year after the Iranian Revolution, there was the war between Iran and Iraq, which lasted about 9 years. And, that was the cherry on top of the pie. And then my brothers, to whom I had been very close, left Iran in 1978. So here I was all alone, the last child in the family. And I didn't realize until then how much my siblings were buffering my relationship with my parents, that when they were around, I would usually, go to them if I needed anything, because my brothers were 5, 9, and 10 years older than I was. So I didn't go to my dad. He would come home tired from work. I would go to my brother, and, they did for me what I needed to be done. Usually it was homework or something I wanted to buy. So all of a sudden I was alone with my parents, who was terribly afraid of everything that was going on. And I think the way I got through those years was by discovering writing.
Yes.
I mean, the most important moment was when I actually decided to write a suicide note, and then got so busy writing the suicide note that I realized that I really enjoyed writing. I should not commit suicide. But yes, I mean, I guess I realized that being lonely isn't the position that any of us wants to be in. But once you kind of reconcile and make peace with it, then all creativity could possibly happen in that space.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to talk about Mrs. Arman and her really declaration that you were a writer.
Yes.
And so talk to me about her and the interesting relationship.
Right. So, it was very hard to be in high school after the Iranian Revolution had taken place, because as girls, we suddenly became invisible. Because, prior to 1979, Iranian women dressed as they wished, which is like how you and I are dressed right now. If you were diehard, Shiite Muslim, you covered your hair and you perhaps put on a veil or something. But if you were not, and you wanted to appear in public without a veil, without a scarf, just in regular clothes, then you could. And the choice was beautiful. It was wonderful that anybody could do whatever they wanted. So what happened was after the revolution, the choice went away. And you can't believe, it sounds very simple and banal, but as soon as they, force you under that thing, whether it's a scarf or a veil, you begin to become irrelevant, invisible. You begin to diminish. It's a very difficult thing to explain. I'm sure people who are, believers, religious believers, don't have that experience. They have some other experience. But for people like me who didn't believe in that way and didn't had not exercised, that dress code, it was a sort of death. And so, now we were going to school with this thing on our heads and the uniform and the, pants underneath the uniform, and you couldn't even wear shoes that expose your toes or anything. It was just really becoming very, very oppressive. And and so the only people who could give us a slight bit of hope, who could kind of mix things up and give us a sense that we were still human and there was still future, were our teachers. And so Mrs. Arman was my literature teacher in my last year of high school. And, she somehow understood what it was that I was thinking and what it was that I was doing and what it was that I was writing. And she would give us these essay assignments, and I would take them terribly seriously. I would go home and write nonstop. And then suddenly, it turns out that she, who had been a very difficult grader, for the first time in many, many years, gave me the top mark. And so, but then she was also simultaneously very worried about what it was that I was writing. So she took me sort of under her wing. Um, she encouraged me to keep writing. She said that I was a writer. I didn't think I was a writer. But just to be acknowledged by a single person, that was really a life-changing experience.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're sharing this, because I think that a lot of times we have, what I call earth angels that are the ones that remind us of our gifts, our power, even in oppressive places. So before I get to the United States, I want to talk about the day you came home and were looking for your father, and he was doing something that was upsetting.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, this was 1984. And in some ways, for people who know George Orwell or have read the book 1984, in some ways, my year, 1984, was exactly like things are in that book. Big Brother, which was,
Mhm.
the chief cleric in the country, was everywhere.
Mhm.
And you couldn't move, you couldn't speak, you couldn't even carry uh, a book in your bag without being stopped to have your bag inspected. People who had glasses on were stopped more than people who didn't have glasses on, because they suspected people with glasses were big readers and they didn't like big readers. So they would stop them to say, so what have you been reading lately? And things that we in this country obviously take for granted, because life can become that oppressive, life can become that terrible. And so it was, all sorts of books, all sorts of writers were suddenly banned. And so I had a pile of books at home, by exactly the writers who were banned and exactly the titles that had been banned. And this wasn't just, your ordinary ban where you say, okay, you can no longer read this book. Your life would be in danger if, the guards came into your house and found those books on your shelves. So my poor father made a bonfire on the balcony of our home, and when I got home, he was burning all of my books, all of my writings. So, I mean, I guess in some ways it wasn't so much the books that bothered me. It was the fact that, I had taken myself seriously and I had written and written and written and, and I thought I had created something and suddenly, he was burning everything. Um, and then that's when I knew that we had to leave, that there was
Right.
nothing to keep us there
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, I just want to tell you, I mean, when I was reading it, my heart was broken right along with you, but I want to talk about coming to America as an immigrant. Did you feel welcomed? Was it hard to navigate? I know your brothers were here. Um, how was it for you?
It was horrible. And it wasn't because America was bad or Americans were bad. It's just that I didn't want to be here. I hadn't
Mm.
chosen to come here. And I think these are the issues that people miss about immigrants and immigration. Because people used to ask me something that just enraged me. They would come up to me and say, oh, they could tell from my accent I was from somewhere else, or I just couldn't speak English. I came without any English. So they would say, trying to make conversation, they would say, oh, so where are you from? And then I would say, I'm from Iran. And, they would say, oh, Iran, that terrible place. So you must be delighted that you're here. I'm like, no, I am not delighted to be in your paradise. And it wasn't that, there was anything wrong with this country. And it wasn't that I didn't realize that this was a great place. It was just that nobody, absolutely nobody in this universe wakes up one morning and says, oh, what a beautiful day to uproot myself from the place where I have been living for centuries and go to another country where I do not have any friends, any relatives, and do not know the culture, don't share the religion, nor speak the language. Oh, let's just do that.
Yeah.
I think it's what we miss when we're talking about immigrants and immigration.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to do this to themselves.
No. And so many people who are leaving these places are running from oppression, are running from abuse and all kinds of other things. And the thought of stepping into a world that you know not of and trying to survive and care for yourself and your family. I mean, I find it so interesting. It's like part of us has gone to sleep in culture, understanding how difficult it would be for anybody to just leave, uproot, and then go someplace else.
Right.
Okay.
So I have to just add this bit because, when in 2016, 2017, Donald Trump kept talking about, these immigrants who come here and, they rob and they do this and they do all sorts of terrible things. And I was thinking, this guy has no clue what it means to be an uprooted refugee or immigrant, because I was lucky for that first year if I learned to catch the right subway on the right track, because I came from a country that didn't have a subway system at that time. So trying to figure out, oh, this one goes north and this one goes south and this one goes, and if you stand on this track, you can go to this place. And if you stand, 2 feet away, on the same track, but, catch the other train, you can't imagine how these things can be absolutely disorienting. So he was saying that on top of all of this disorientation that we as immigrants would have to go through, we were also, robbing people and, planning, whatever crimes. And I was thinking, dude, it's practically impossible because we just don't know where we are. We're confined home. So just, it's one of the things that I've tried to do in subsequent books, especially in my most recent one, is to just try to create that sense of sensitivity among the rest of us.
Yes. Well, I want to ask you, because of what you went through in Iran and what we are looking at on this planet where women are concerned, the call to make women invisible, the call to take away their choices, all of that, what does that bring up in you?
Of course I'm enraged. And of course every time I look at what's happening in Iran right now, I see myself among them. I still see these women who get arrested because, a bunch of hair is showing from under their scarf, and I say, this was me, and this could still have been me. But I think if we who live outside of these countries in the West, in the United States, if we fail to see that one way or another, these acts of injustice will affect us, maybe not today and maybe not tomorrow, but in the long run, they will. Then we're just losing out. We're falling behind planning for our own futures because they become refugees, because they will come to our borders, because they will eventually, how did 9/11 happen? Well, the Taliban took over Afghanistan long before 2001 when they attacked the United States. But if we had paid attention from the time when they were, keeping women at home and driving them under the veil and everything, then we would have been readier, or maybe we would have done some things to prevent them from getting farther and farther along. So I just think that the way we are intertwined as a global community, it is impossible for these injustices to happen in one part of the world and for the rest of us to remain unaffected for long.
100% agree. We are interconnected, and it's fascinating to me how selective, memory can be with people, because history keeps repeating itself on certain levels, and it's kind of like part of us has gone to sleep.
Mhm.
I want to know, what is the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center?
Well, when I came here, one of the first things that I was thinking, and it happened like 2 or 3 years after I had already arrived, that people who had been here for a while, Iranians who had been in the United States longer, or even Americans, would ask me questions about what was happening in Iran. And when I would tell them, they would say, really? No, I mean, there were some really significant events that had happened that no one seemed to have heard of. And the news coverage was missing. There seemed to, it's the best thing you can do for a dictator to let them, commit crimes or atrocities, and then allow them to do it all in anonymity and in silence. And so I thought, well, the least I can do is to collect testimonies, to create a repository for people to testify, not before court, but, just before a camera for posterity, what it is that they had witnessed, what it is that they had suffered. So we created this archive, or at least it is partially an archive, to preserve the memories of whatever violations that have happened. I think the closest thing I can compare it to is to what had happened in South Africa, under the apartheid, that you needed to have some sort of a system that preserved the memories of people who had fought against or had just suffered. And same goes for the Holocaust. Same
Yeah.
goes for the history of African Americans in the United States. and
Mm.
and so I thought, at the least we can do is to deny the violators what they desire the most, which is to rub the pages of history of any record. And that's what in part the center is.
Well, I think it's beautiful, and how wonderful that you did that. For me, I feel like if we all had access to the history of the world, we would not be so nonchalant about what is occurring, and the people who want to just be under the radar and do whatever they're doing. it wouldn't be easy to do because we would care for one another and we would care what's happening on this planet. So I love that you're doing this. How do people find you?
Oh, well, I have a website, royahakakian.com. And major online book sellers, Amazon and everything else, including Random House. They sell my books, and you saw me as a speaker. I have speaker agents and everything, so I'm in the ether. I'm online a lot, on Twitter, on Facebook.
Yeah, and ladies, I would really encourage you to get her books and explore her writings. I mean, they're articulate and very vivid. It's quite beautiful. So I asked my guests the same last question. This show is called Women Awakening. What do you think is the most important thing about women waking up in this moment?
Um, I think that our destinies as women are interconnected throughout the world. I was watching Afghan women 2 years ago, when US troops pulled out, lost the choice to dress code. They were driven under the veil by force again. They had the choice, the ones who wanted to dress like you and me, and the ones who wanted to abide by the dress code laws of Islam, they did. But as soon as US troops pulled out, they lost the choice. And just about the same time last year, women in the United States lost the choice to choose what they want to do during their own pregnancies. I can't think that this was an accident. I can't, and we shouldn't. And I think the moment we fail to see feminism as a global movement, and the moment we fail to guard each other's rights from every walk of life in every part of the world, is the moment we all became weaker and our rights started to slip away. So I say, the sooner we see that this is a sisterhood throughout the world, and we need to be supporting each other if we want to keep our rights intact, then the better off we are.
Yes, beautifully said. Roya, I am so honored to know you, to have been a witness to your grace on a stage, and to have read your beautiful writing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on. I loved seeing you again, and hope we run into each other again.
Me too.
All right.
Okay, ladies, I'm going to say the same thing I say to you every week in a different form. Today, now, this is the time for you to stand up, bring your brilliance forward, bring your gifts, and not give your power away to anyone. You are strong, you are clear, you are grand, you are glorious. So for this and so much more, I give thanks. I trust this process. I trust you. I trust your life. And I look forward to seeing you again.